The GPS died 2 miles back, leaving Maya Patel with nothing but the pale glow of her headlights cutting through the November fog. She pulled her sedan to the shoulder of the empty highway, gravel crunching under the tires as she fumbled for her phone. No signal, of course. She'd been driving for 14 hours straight, pushing through Ohio farmland toward her new job in Detroit. The exhaustion was hitting her hard now, her eyelids heavy as lead. Through the murky windshield, she could make out the silhouette of a large building, maybe half a mile ahead, its dark bulk rising against the starless sky. Maya squinted, trying to make sense of the structure. As she drove closer, her headlights swept across a weathered sign, Millbrook General Hospital, founded 1952. The building loomed before her, 6 stories of crumbling brick and boarded windows. Clearly abandoned, but it would have to do. She needed rest before she killed herself on the road. She pulled into the empty parking lot, weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt. The fog seemed thicker here, swirling around her car like ghostly fingers. Maya grabbed her purse and a small flashlight from the glove compartment, then stepped out into the damp night air. The cold bit through her thin jacket immediately. She hurried toward the main entrance, her footsteps echoing off the silent walls. Most of the windows were boarded up, but she noticed a side door that looked like it might give way. The brass nameplate read, "Emergency Entrance." Maya tried the handle, locked, but the door frame was rotted. She put her shoulder against it and pushed. With a splintering crack, the door swung open, revealing a corridor that disappeared into absolute darkness. She clicked on her flashlight, the narrow beam revealing peeling paint and water-stained walls. The air inside was stale and cold, carrying the lingering smell of disinfectant mixed with something else, something organic and unpleasant. "Hello," she called out, her voice swallowed by the emptiness. "Anyone here?" No response. Good. The last thing she needed was trouble with security guards or squatters. Maya found what looked like an old waiting room near the entrance. Plastic chairs were stacked against one wall, and a reception desk sat covered in dust and debris. It wasn't comfortable, but it was shelter. She settled into one of the plastic chairs, using her jacket as a blanket, and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, but it didn't last. Maya woke to the sound of footsteps echoing from somewhere deep in the building. Heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to be moving toward her location. She sat up, heart pounding, and checked her phone. 2:17 a.m. The footsteps stopped. Maya held her breath, straining to listen. Nothing but the sound of wind rattling loose windows somewhere above. She was about to settle back down when a door slammed shut in the distance, the sound reverberating through the empty corridors. "Hello?" she called out again, louder this time. "Is someone there?" Her voice echoed back to her, distorted and hollow. Maya grabbed her flashlight and stood up, every muscle tense. She needed to know if she was alone in here. The beam of her light revealed a corridor stretching away from the waiting room, lined with doors marked with faded medical department signs. Radiology, cardiology, pediatrics. She started down the hallway, her footsteps seeming impossibly loud in the silence. The pediatrics door was slightly ajar. Maya pushed it open and swept her light across the room beyond. Empty, but fresh footprints were visible in the dust on the floor, large boot prints that definitely weren't hers. "Look, I'm not trying to cause any trouble," she called out. "I just needed a place to sleep for a few hours. I'll be gone in the morning." A metallic clang echoed from the stairwell at the end of the corridor, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone or something ascending the steps. Maya's hands were shaking now. She backed away from the stairwell, but as she turned to retreat toward the exit, she heard voices coming from that direction. Multiple voices, low and urgent. She was trapped between them. Maya ducked into the nearest room, what had once been a patient room, still containing a rusted bed frame and some overturned equipment. She crouched behind the bed and switched off her flashlight, plunging herself into complete darkness. The voices were getting closer. 2 men from the sound of it. "Told you someone was in here," one of them was saying. His voice was rough, gravelly. "Yeah, well, they picked the wrong place to crash," came the reply. This voice was higher, nervous. "We got work to do." Maya pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. Through the partially open door, she could see the faint glow of their flashlights approaching. "Check the rooms," gravelly voice ordered, "and be quiet about it. Don't need the cops showing up." Maya's mind raced. What kind of work were they talking about? Nothing legal, that was certain. She felt around in the darkness, looking for another way out of the room, but her fingers found only empty space and debris. The light beams were moving systematically from room to room. They'd reach her hiding spot in minutes. Then Maya noticed something that made her stomach drop. There was another smell in the room now, stronger than the general mustiness of the abandoned building. It was sweet and cloying, with an underlying note of rot that made her gag. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she began to make out shapes on the floor around her, dark stains on the concrete, and something that might have been clothing. It was hard to tell in the gloom, but whatever it was the source of that terrible smell. Maya covered her mouth to keep from making a sound. She was crouched next to something that had once been human. The footsteps were right outside the door now. Maya could hear one of the men breathing heavily. "This one," nervous voice whispered. The door creaked as it was pushed fully open. A flashlight beam swept across the room, passing just inches over Maya's head. She closed her eyes, knowing that even the whites of her eyes might give her away in the darkness. The light lingered on the shapes scattered around the floor. Maya heard a soft chuckle. "Looks like our friend from last week is still settling in," gravelly voice said. "Come on, let's check upstairs. Whoever's in here probably heard us coming and went up." The light withdrew, and Maya heard their footsteps moving away toward the stairwell. She waited until the sound faded completely before switching her flashlight back on. The beam revealed what she'd already suspected. Scattered around the room were the remains of at least 3 people in various stages of decomposition. The newest looked like it might have been there for a week, just as the man had said. The others were older, reduced to little more than bones and scraps of clothing. Maya fought down a wave of nausea. She had to get out of here, now. She crept to the doorway and listened. The men's voices echoed from somewhere on the upper floors. This was her chance. Maya slipped out of the room and hurried back toward the entrance, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. But as she rounded the corner toward the waiting room, she stopped short. A third man was standing between her and the exit. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, wearing dark coveralls that looked wet in the dim light filtering through the boarded windows. When he turned toward her, Maya saw that his face was partially obscured by a surgical mask, and his eyes held no trace of humanity. "Well, well," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Look what we have here." Maya turned to run back the way she came, but gravelly voice was already coming down the stairs, blocking her escape route. She was cornered. "Please," she whispered. "I won't tell anyone. I'll just leave and forget I was ever here." The big man in coveralls took a step toward her, and Maya noticed that the wet patches on his clothes were dark red. "I'm afraid that's not how this works," gravelly voice said as he reached the bottom of the stairs. "See, this is our place of business, and we can't have witnesses." "What business?" Maya asked, though she was afraid she already knew. "Disposal," the big man said simply. "People pay us good money to make problems disappear, permanently." Maya's mind flashed to the bodies in the patient room. How many people had simply vanished, their families never knowing what happened to them? "The thing is," nervous voice added, appearing from another corridor, "you've seen too much, way too much." Maya backed against the wall, trapped. The 3 men began to close in on her, moving with the practiced coordination of people who'd done this many times before. But as the big man reached for her, Maya noticed something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Behind him, through a gap in the boarded windows, she could see flashing lights approaching in the distance. Red and blue strobes cutting through the fog. "Police!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Help! I'm in here!" The men froze, then turned toward the windows. The lights were definitely getting closer. "Shit!" gravelly voice hissed. "How did they—" "The door," nervous voice said. "The broken door. Someone must have called it in." The big man lunged for Maya, but she was ready. She dodged to the side and ran toward the nearest stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. Behind her, she could hear the men arguing in harsh whispers. Maya reached the 2nd floor and kept running, looking for another way out. The police lights were closer now, and she could hear car doors slamming in the parking lot. She found a window that wasn't completely boarded up and began kicking at the loose plywood. The board gave way with a crash, and Maya stuck her head out the window. "Up here," she yelled. "2nd floor." Flashlight beams immediately focused on her position, and she heard authoritative voices shouting orders. Within minutes, the building was swarming with officers. Maya was escorted out of the hospital by a young policewoman who wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her to a waiting ambulance. "You're lucky," the officer said. "We've been tracking these guys for months. They've been using abandoned buildings all over the state for their operation." "How did you find me?" Maya asked. "Anonymous tip," the officer replied. "Someone called in saying they saw suspicious activity at the old hospital. Probably a local who's been keeping an eye on the place." As Maya was being checked over by the paramedics, she watched the police lead the 3 men out of the building in handcuffs. The big man looked directly at her as he was loaded into a squad car, and even from a distance, she could see the cold fury in his eyes. But it was over. She was safe. The next morning, Maya was sitting in a diner on the outskirts of town, giving her final statement to the detective assigned to the case. The coffee was terrible, but she didn't care. She was alive, and that was enough. "So you never saw who called in the tip?" the detective asked. "No," Maya said, "but I'm grateful they did. If they hadn't..." "Yeah, well, you got lucky," the detective said, closing his notebook. "We found 11 bodies in that building. Been going on for almost 2 years according to what we've pieced together." Maya shuddered. "What happens now?" "Now you go on with your life," the detective said, "and try to forget this ever happened." But as Maya left the diner and got back on the highway toward Detroit, She couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The anonymous tip, the perfect timing, it all seemed too convenient. She pulled over at a rest stop and called the police station, asking to speak with the detective. "I was wondering," she said when he came on the line. "Do you have any more details about that anonymous tip, like where it came from?" There was a pause. "That's funny," the detective said. "I was just looking into that myself. The call came from a payphone inside the hospital." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Inside the hospital? Yeah. Old landline that was supposed to be disconnected years ago, but somehow it was still working. Maya's hands were shaking as she hung up the phone. She thought about the voices she'd heard, the footprints in the dust, the perfect timing of the police arrival, and then she remembered something else. In that patient room, among the scattered remains, there had been one body that looked different from the others. Older, wearing what might have been a hospital gown, and positioned as if it had been trying to reach the door. Someone else had been trapped in that hospital once. Someone who hadn't made it out alive. But maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way to make sure that Maya would. As she pulled back onto the highway, Maya glanced in her rearview mirror at the abandoned hospital growing smaller in the distance. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw a figure standing in one of the upper windows, watching her drive away. But when she looked again, there was nothing there but empty glass and shadows. Maya drove straight through to Detroit without stopping, the radio playing softly to fill the silence. She never spoke about what happened in the hospital to anyone except the police, and she never drove through Ohio again. But sometimes, on cold November nights when the fog rolled in thick and low, she would think about that abandoned building and wonder if she was really the only one who made it out alive that night. The official police report listed the case as closed, with 3 arrests and 11 recovered bodies. But it made no mention of the mysterious phone call that saved Maya's life, or the figure that several officers claimed to have seen watching them from the hospital windows as they worked the crime scene. Some mysteries, the detective decided, were better left unsolved.